Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Miss J.A. English. Now, the last time we had started looking at understanding poetry and we looked at the structure of poems. This week we're going to be looking specifically at imagery and figurative language. Are we ready to go? Yes, we are. Now, the first topic is imagery. And when we think of imagery, we think of the word image. So, what is imagery? Imagery is a language that appeals to the senses. And you know, we have five senses, right? So, anything, any form of language that appeals to whether you see, smell, hear, taste, or feel, those would be considered to be imagery. And it is said that imagery helps readers to visualize whatever they read. It creates a picture in the reader's mind. And you know that poems uses a lot of imagery because this is where the poet is able to connect with the reader as to what he's trying to portray in that poem per se. So we're going to look at the first type of imagery, which is called sight imagery, otherwise called visual imagery. So these are words that appeal to what we see. And let's look at an example here. Hundreds of tiny yellow blossoms dotted the plush green meadow. Wow. So we're looking at colors here. So the yellow blossoms, the green meadow. We can all visualize what it is that these things would appear to look like by using these descriptions. So that's the sight imagery. Any word that appeals to what we see, and a lot of colors would would come under types of imagery. Next imagery we have is sound imagery, and it's also called auditory imagery. And this, of course, would appeal to what our sense of hearing, whatever we hear. So look at the example that is shown. Horns honked and sirens screamed across the night. So we can hear the sounds of the horn. We can hear the sound of the siren, and that will give you a more realistic way of understanding what it is that is being heard through the poet's voice. So that's number two. Let's look at the other kind of imagery that exists in poems. Now we have what we call the smell imagery, also called olfactory imagery. So words that appeal to our sense of smell. So let's look at the example noted here. The scent of cinnamon apples wafted through the air. We can visualize or we can understand what cinnamon smells like, right? For those who have experience with smelling cinnamon, you have an idea of what it is that the poet is trying to understand, or what is the poet is trying to make you understand by using the description of cinnamon here. Then we have taste imagery, otherwise known as the gustatory imagery. And this, of course, appeals to what we taste, words that appeals to how things may taste. So let's look at the example here. Tart cherries puckered my mouth as the sweet crust melted against my tongue. So tart, there is a word that would be used to describe how something tastes. And also sweet is another one. So these words would bring out the taste imagery in the reader. And then finally, we look at touch imagery, otherwise called tactile. And this has to do with what words appealing to things that we feel or touch, or how things feel when we touch them. So let's look at an example here. Splintered boards scraped my legs, pricking the soft skin. Splintered board scraped my leg, pricking the soft skin. So we know that splinters refers to anything that was a piece of something that was broken. And of course, pricking would have a feeling of being stick with something sharp. So right then and there, the reader has an idea of how this splintered board felt on this particular person's leg. All right. So those are the five types of imagery that you will see coming out in a poem or even in stories too. All right. So let's do a little recap to see how much you have learned so far as it relates to imagery in poems. So what is imagery? That's the first thing. Imagery is any language that appeals to what? Our five senses. That's just a general short description that will be easy for you to remember. Second question, how does imagery help us understand a poem? Now, the imagery helps us understand a poem because our senses are appealed to, and everybody has senses. Everybody has five senses. So whatever it is that the poet uses for you to visualize what is seen, what is heard, what is felt, it makes it more realistic for you. And so you should be able to understand the poem better because of these uses of imagery. Imagery appeals to our, that's correct, our senses. Yes. Number four, the wolf howled in the woods appeals to which sense? Howled, that would be what? The sound imagery. So it appeals to our sense of hearing. Number five, the wind was cold upon my skin is an example of blank imagery. Cold upon my skin, that would have to do with what? How we feel. So that's a touch imagery, isn't it? Otherwise called tactile. So it is an example of tactile imagery. All right, so that's it for imagery, short and spicy. Let's move on to figurative language. Wow. Now, figurative language is like you must understand figurative language for you to understand poetry. Yes, every poem has some form of figurative language used in it. And whereas you might not be familiar with the term figurative language, you may also see the term figurative devices. You may also see the term literary devices. They are one and the same. Now, what is figurative language? Figurative language communicates ideas beyond the literal meaning of words. So you know the opposite of figurative is literal. Literal is what we take at face value, right? The real meaning or dictionary meaning of a thing. But the figurative is the underlying meaning, right? A meaning that goes deeper than what the words reflect in itself. So let's look at some different types of figurative language. First one we're going to look at is a very common one, simile. Now the definition for simile says, uses like or as to compare seemingly unlike things. So I would say it's a comparison. You have to compare one thing to another thing, but you are using as or like to make that comparison. Let's look at metaphor. Now, a metaphor is very similar to a simile in that they are both comparing things. But the thing about it, for metaphor, we do not use as or like, right? It's a comparison, right? But we do not use as or like. And it's also saying one thing is another thing. Hyperbole is another figurative language that is common, and it's basically an exaggeration, making something seem to appear more than what it actually is, right? But we're going to look at some examples of these as we go along in the video. Next one we're going to look at is personification. Personification is to write about an idea, an object, or an animal as if it were a human. You can also say it is giving human characteristics to non-living things, right? So we're making something that is lifeless, yeah, becoming a person or becoming a human. As the first six letters of the word personification suggest person. So think of it that way. Use that to help guide you to remember what a personification is. You're You're making an object or a non-living thing into a person. Simple. Yeah. All right, we're going to look at some examples of these now. So, my brain is like a cluttered garage. Now, we know that's a simile because there's a comparison there between what? A brain and a garage, and we have used the word like. So, it is a simile based on those criteria that we have ticked off there. So my brain is like a cluttered garage. And if you look at the photo at the bottom, you can see, you can actually visualize also what it is that this simile is saying. So in a way, these figurative language are also closely linked to imagery that we just looked at. This is would be like a visual imagery. It would fall under visual imagery because we are able to see what it is that that brain would appear like. That means this person is confused, right? All manner of things are going on inside there. Let's look at the same context and look at it in the form of a metaphor. So we have taken away the word like from it, and it now becomes my brain is a cluttered garage. So you see the difference between the metaphor there. There is a comparison, but there is no use of like in it, which takes away from so you're comparing two things, right, in both of them, but one is saying it's another and one is like it's like another. Trust me, don't be confused about it. It's quite simple. So how does this comparison of my brain to a clutter garage help you to understand what the writer is saying? As I said before, it shows confusion. So every figurative language that is used, the poet or the writer uses those for a specific reason. There's a point or a meaning he wants to bring across that he doesn't state it literally. He could have said, my brain is confused. But in poetry, or in literature, poets will use words in a creative way. And so instead of saying my brain is confused, it is more creative to use a simile and a metaphor to bring across the same meaning. And the image there, as I said, would help you understand the overall meaning of both those devices. Let's look at personification example. The wind danced through the meadow. The wind danced through the meadow. Wow. Can wind dance? Do wind does can wind do they have feet? No. So we're making the wind into a person, and so it becomes a personification. Let's look at the other example. My friend's unkind words punched me in the gut. Now, are words human? Do they have hands to punch? No, but they have made the words into human by suggesting that the words punched. Now, of course, these terms both have meanings, right? So let's go back to the first example. The wind danced through the meadow. So it gives you an idea of the wind's movement at the time going through the meadow, right? Dancing would appear as though it is calmly moving through the meadow. Okay. The second example, my friend's unkind words punched me in the gut, would suggest that these words hurt, right? These were hurtful words that were spoken to the friend. And so this is a creative way of expressing such hurt. Hyperbole, as I said before, it is an exaggeration. So you're making something seem more than what it really is. So example number one, I've told you a million times to stop talking. Oh my God. I think I've said this already in my classroom to my students. But have I really said a million times to them to stop talking? No, that's an exaggeration. It therefore means, though, that I have told them many times, right? But you're exaggerating the number of times to show how much you have actually said the thing. The other example of hyperbole is, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Oh my God. Oh, wow. That person is very hungry, right? That's the meaning of that second example. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Now, first thing, a horse is huge, right? And you'd have to be extremely hungry to eat a whole horse. So, yeah, we get that understanding clear right then and there. So, exaggeration is really just making something appear to be more than what it really is. Now we're going to look at alliteration. Alliteration. Now, this one is not so common, but I mean, I'm sure many of you would have been exposed to it. Now, alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Let's look at an example. Moses let the motor run for a moment. So if you notice, we have highlighted the letter M in certain words in the sentence. Moses, motor, and moment. So we have three words in that sentence beginning with the same consonant sound, and that is where the repetition of the consonant sounds come in, which makes it an alliteration. Most times in poems, you would see these words coming closer together. So for example, Peter picked a peck of pickled peppers. Yes, we have like all the words begin with the same consonant sounds in that example. And we have others such as Sally sells seashells by the seashore. That's another popular example of an alliteration. So once you see a consonant sound coming in close repetition of each other, then you know an alliteration is being used there. And alliteration adds meaning by reinforcing a sound. The final figurative language that we're going to look at today is called contrast. And of course, this one is not so common. So this might be new to some of you, yes. But let's look at what it means. A contrast is to show or express the opposite of things, right? So writers use contrast to show the differences between two or more different things. Let's look at some examples here. I left the noisy city and went to the quiet countryside. This one is very straightforward. So we know the opposite of noisy is quiet, and we know the opposite of city is countryside, or otherwise called rural area. So they have doubled down on the contrast in this example. So contrast is very much easy to identify once you are aware of words that are opposites. Now, what are the effectiveness of using figurative language, right? Why do poets want to use these expressions in their poems? Figurative language is used in writing to allow the reader to use his or her imagination. A lot of children or a lot of students, they say they can't write because they're not able to think outside the box, or their imaginations are basically limited. Now, when you're exposed to poems and different stories and the language, the figurative language that is used in these, then I think it should enable you to be better writers, right? And be better able to use your own imagination to do your own writing. We say the figurative language is effective when the imagination is activated and readers begin to get the impression that the writer is trying to convey, right? So once you are able as a reader to understand the message of the writer, then it means that the devices that were used were effective. Yeah? So look at some examples here. A storm is coming. Yeah, that's straightforward. A storm is coming. This is telling you of something is about to happen, a storm. But I could have expressed that in a different way, a more creative way, using figurative language, and it would be telling me the same thing. Let's look. Bright bolts of lightning forked through the dark clouds, and thunder rumbled across the valley, shattering the silence. Oh my God. Mm-mm-mm. Lovely words. Bright bolts of lightning. We can visualize lightning. Mm? We can visualize dark clouds. We can hear the thunder, right? We have all experienced some storm at some point of our lives, shattering the silence. My God, all of that is saying the same thing as the example above, but it's using figurative language. So the use of the figurative language in this example makes the details more impactful and it evokes the reader's imagination. Oh, wow. So, I hope, yeah, when you're called upon, maybe by your teacher or you just feel to write, that you will use imagery and figurative language in your writing to make it more impactful and evoke imagination. All right. So that's it for our part two of understanding poetry. Today, when we come back, we're going to look at another topic, aren't we? Yes. So thank you for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Thank you for watching.